There comes a moment in every life when God speaks, not in a whisper, not in a suggestion, but in a command. Leave. Leave the place where you've been comfortable. Leave the situation that's been holding you back. Leave the chains that have bound you for far too long. And the question is, will you listen? Will you move? Abraham was called to leave his homeland, his family, everything he knew, not knowing where he was going. But he trusted God, and because he obeyed, he became the father of many nations. Some of you are waiting for a sign, but the sign is the stirring in your spirit right now. God is calling you out of toxic relationships, out of dead-end jobs, out of old mindsets, out of fear. Moses had to leave the palace of Egypt. He was raised with comfort, with privilege. But God had a calling on his life greater than his surroundings. Some of you were born into environments that you have outgrown. You keep trying to fit in, but you don't belong there anymore. You were never meant to settle in Egypt when there's a promised land waiting for you. Lot's wife was given a chance to leave the destruction behind, but she looked back, and in that moment she turned into a pillar of salt. Some of you keep looking back, reminiscing about what was, regretting what you lost. But hear me today. God cannot bless who you were. He can only bless who you're becoming. Stop looking back at what he called you out of. Stop longing for what he has already decided is no longer yours. Peter left his boat. He left everything he had known to follow Jesus, and when Jesus said, "Come," he walked on water. Some of you have been asking God for a miracle, but he's waiting for you to step out of the boat. The miracle is in the movement. You cannot walk on water while staying where it's safe. There is something greater waiting for you, but you will never reach it if you do not leave. Leave the fear, leave the doubt, leave the excuses, leave the pain of your past. Your destiny is not behind you. It's in front of you. The chains are broken. The door is open. The call has been made. When God says leave, he is not asking for your opinion. He is not waiting for your comfort. He is not negotiating terms. He is commanding movement. Some of you have been sitting in the same place for years, waiting for the right time, waiting for a clear sign, waiting for confirmation. But the confirmation is in your spirit. That unsettled feeling, that divine discomfort, that voice whispering, you don't belong here anymore. That is God speaking. That is the call. And the only question is, will you obey? When God told Abraham to leave his country, his people, and his father's household, he gave no details, no map, no destination, just a promise. Go to the land I will show you. Faith doesn't come with a GPS. Faith moves in obedience before the full picture is revealed. Some of you are waiting for God to show you the entire journey before you take the first step, but God doesn't work that way. He gives you just enough light for the step in front of you. And if you refuse to take that step, you will stay stuck. Stuck in the familiar, stuck in mediocrity, stuck in a place that no longer serves your destiny. The truth is, not everyone will understand why you are leaving. Not everyone is meant to go with you. Some people will call you crazy. Some will try to hold you back. Some will remind you of how good you had it. Why would you leave that job? Why would you walk away from that relationship? Why would you step into the unknown when you could stay safe? But faith is not about safety. Faith is about trust. If God is telling you to leave, it's because there is something greater ahead. But you will never see it if you don't move. Some of you have been wrestling with the decision, hesitating, second-guessing, waiting for things to make sense. But God is not asking you to understand. He is asking you to obey. The door is open, the chains are broken, the opportunity is in front of you, but God will not drag you through it. You must decide to walk. And when you do, heaven will back you, provision will find you, and everything that has been waiting for you on the other side will finally be yours. But first, you must leave. Faith moves before it makes sense. Faith walks when the destination is unknown. Faith obeys without full instructions. When God told Abraham to leave his country and his father's house, he did not hand him a blueprint, a roadmap, or a 5-year plan. He simply said, "Go to the land I will show you." No specifics, no guarantees, just a command and a promise. And Abraham moved. He didn't question. He didn't demand clarity. He didn't wait for all the pieces to align. He stepped out on nothing but a word from God. And that word was enough. Some of you are waiting for every detail to be laid out before you take a step, but God doesn't operate that way. He reveals as you go. He shows you the next step only after you take the first. If Abraham had refused to move until he knew exactly where he was going, he would have never stepped into his destiny. And that is exactly where many people remain, stuck at the starting line, frozen by fear, paralyzed by uncertainty, waiting for clarity before they move. But clarity comes through obedience. The provision is in the going. The miracles are in the movement. The Red Sea did not part while Israel stood still. It parted when they walked. Peter did not walk on water while he stayed in the boat. He walked when he stepped out. The walls of Jericho did not fall while Israel stood in place. They fell after they marched. Faith is not about waiting for proof before you act. Faith is acting as if the promise is already fulfilled. You don't need all the details. You don't need the whole picture. You don't need to see how it will work out. All you need is a word from God. Some of you have been delaying, hesitating, waiting for God to show you every step before you move. But He is saying, go first, and I will show you along the way. If you refuse to step out, you will never see what He has prepared for you. If you demand full understanding before obedience, you will stay exactly where you are. God is calling you forward. Your blessing is ahead of you, not behind you. The door is open, but you must walk through it, move, and watch what God will do. Some places are too small for the destiny God has placed inside you. Some environments can no longer hold who you are becoming. There comes a time when God says, you don't fit here anymore. And when that moment comes, you have a choice. Stay where it's safe and familiar, or step into the unknown and grow into the person God created you to be. Moses grew up in Pharaoh's palace, surrounded by wealth, power, and privilege. He had the best education, the finest clothes, the highest status. But deep inside, he was never meant to stay there. He was called to something greater. He wasn't meant to rule in Egypt. He was meant to lead God's people out of it. If Moses had stayed in the palace, he would have lived a comfortable life, but he would have never fulfilled his calling. And for some of you, that is the battle you're facing right now. You have outgrown the place you're in. You've outgrown the relationships, the job, the environment, the mindset. But instead of moving forward, you keep trying to shrink yourself to fit in a space that can no longer contain you. When a bird is in a nest, it is safe, it is warm, it is fed, but there comes a time when the mother pushes it out, not to harm it, but because it was never meant to stay in the nest forever. And some of you feel like you're being pushed, stretched, uncomfortable because God is trying to move you. You were never meant to settle where you are. You were never meant to remain in the same place, the same level, the same routine. Growth requires movement. Destiny requires separation. You can't hold on to the past and embrace the future at the same time. You can't cling to comfort and walk in faith. You can't stay in Egypt and step into the promised land. The people around you might not understand. They may tell you that you're making a mistake, that you're being reckless, that you should stay where it's safe. But God is calling you out. You don't fit there anymore. It's time to stop forcing what's not meant for you. You are being called higher, being stretched wider, being prepared for something greater. The only question is, will you move? Some things are not meant to be carried into your future. Some attachments, some memories, some relationships, they were only meant for a season. But the danger comes when God calls you forward, and instead of stepping into what's next, you keep looking back. Lot's wife had an opportunity to escape destruction. The angels gave her and her family clear instructions. Run! Don't stop. Don't look back. The past was over. What had been was no longer. A new life was ahead. But in a single moment of hesitation, a single glance backward, she lost everything. She turned into a pillar of salt, not because God wanted to punish her, but because she could not let go of what was behind her. And that is where many people get stuck. They don't move forward because their heart is still tied to the past. They keep replaying old memories, holding on to old relationships, grieving over what they lost. But hear me today. God cannot bless what you refuse to release. If He has called you forward, if He has told you to let it go, it is because what is ahead of you is greater than what is behind you. Some of you are standing at the edge of your breakthrough, but you keep turning around, longing for what was. You say, but it was comfortable, it was familiar, I knew how life worked back there. And so you hesitate, you delay, you entertain the idea of going back. But let me warn you, looking back will cost you everything. You cannot embrace the future while clinging to the past. You cannot step into your destiny while holding on to yesterday. Israel longed for Egypt. Even after God delivered them, they complained in the wilderness, saying, at least in Egypt we had food. But Egypt was bondage. It was slavery. And yet they romanticized the past because the future required faith. Some of you are doing the same. You keep telling yourself that what you had was better than what God has promised. But that is a lie. God does not take things away to leave you empty. He takes things away to make room for greater. But you will never see it if you keep looking back. Stop mourning what God has already closed. Stop revisiting what He has already removed. What's ahead is greater. Keep moving. Obedience is the gateway to miracles. God's power is available, His promises are true, and His blessings are prepared. But He is waiting on you to move. Some of you are asking for signs, waiting for confirmation, praying for breakthrough. But the truth is, God has already spoken. He has already given you the word. He has already opened the door, and now it's your turn to take action. Peter was in the boat when he saw Jesus walking on water. He said, Lord, if it's you, tell me to come. And Jesus said one word, come. That was it. No details, no safety net, no explanation of how it would work, just an invitation to step into the miraculous. Peter could have stayed in the boat. He could have reasoned that walking on water was impossible. He could have waited for Jesus to come to him instead, but instead he stepped out. And as long as his focus was on Jesus, as long as he moved in obedience, he did the impossible. Some of you are waiting for the conditions to be perfect before you step out. You're waiting for every detail to be worked out, every fear to disappear, every question to be answered. But faith doesn't wait for certainty. Faith moves when God says move. Peter didn't know how the water would hold him, but he stepped out anyway. And that is what God is calling you to do. Step out even when you don't have all the answers. Step out even when fear tries to hold you back. Step out even when it doesn't make sense. Because the miracle is not in staying where it's safe. The miracle is in the movement. Israel stood before the Red Sea, trapped between Pharaoh's army and an impossible barrier. They cried out to God for help, and God said, "Why are you crying out to me? Tell the people to move forward." And as they moved, the waters parted. The miracle did not happen while they stood still. The miracle happened when they obeyed. Some of you are waiting for the sea to part before you move, but God is waiting for you to move before he parts the sea. Stop hesitating, stop doubting, stop waiting for everything to make sense. Take the step, walk in obedience, and watch God do what only he can do. What God has for you is greater than what you're leaving behind. The problem is you don't see it yet. You can't hold it in your hands. You can't measure it. You can't compare it to what you had before. And that's where the enemy tries to keep you stuck in uncertainty, in hesitation, in fear of the unknown. He whispers, what if this next season isn't as good? What if you're making a mistake? What if you walk away from something you'll never get back? And so you stand still, torn between what you know and what you can't yet see. This is the battle of faith, trusting that what God has prepared is better than anything you are leaving behind. Abraham had to leave his home, his family, his familiar surroundings, and go to a land God would show him. Not a land God showed him in advance, not a land he could visit, inspect, and approve before leaving. He had to move first. He had to trust that God's promise was better than what he was walking away from. And because he obeyed, he stepped into blessings that changed history. Some of you are struggling to move forward because you're still grieving what you left behind. You're looking back at relationships, jobs, seasons of life, opportunities that felt good, felt safe, felt comfortable, and you wonder, did I make the right choice? Did I give up something good? But hear this. God never asks you to leave something unless he has something greater ahead. He is not taking you backward. He is not calling you into less. He is leading you into more. Israel cried for Egypt when the wilderness got hard. They forgot the chains, the oppression, the suffering, and only remembered the little comforts they once had. They longed for what was familiar, even though it was bondage. And many of you are doing the same. You're looking back at a place that could never hold the fullness of who you are meant to be. You're comparing your future to a past that God has already closed. But what's ahead is greater. What God has planned is beyond what you can imagine. Your best days are not behind you. They are still to come. Let go of what was. Stop grieving over what you lost. Struck that God's promise is bigger than your past, and step boldly into your future. Fear and excuses will keep you stuck in places you were never meant to stay. God has called you higher. He has given you a vision. He has placed a purpose inside of you. But every time it's time to move, something stops you. You say, I'm not ready. What if I fail? What if I lose what I have? What if people don't support me? And so you hesitate. You delay. You reason your way out of obedience. And all the while, your destiny is waiting on the other side of your experience. Moses stood before the burning bush as God called him to deliver Israel. And what was his response? Who am I that I should go? He doubted himself. He doubted his ability. He pointed to his weaknesses. I'm not a good speaker, Lord. I stutter. I don't have what it takes. But God didn't ask Moses for perfection. He didn't ask him to be qualified. He asked him to obey. And still, Moses made excuse. He focused on everything he lacked instead of everything God had promised. And if he had let his fear win, he would have never stepped into his calling. Some of you are in that same place. You are standing before the door God has opened, but instead of walking through, you are listing every reason why you can't. You're looking at your limitations instead of God's power. You're worried about what people will say, about what could go wrong, about whether or not you're enough. But hear this, God does not call the qualified. He qualifies the called. If he told you to go, he will equip you. If he told you to move, he will provide. The fear you feel is a lie. The doubts in your mind are distractions. And if you let them control you, you will miss what God has for you. Israel stood at the edge of the promised land, but fear kept them wandering in the wilderness for 40 years. They saw the giants instead of God's promise. They let doubt rob them of their destiny. But you don't have to make the same mistake. Fear is not your master. Excuses are not your prison. God has already prepared the way. The only thing left is for you to take the step. Walk forward. Trust him. Move in faith. Your destiny is waiting. Delayed obedience is still disobedience. Some of you know exactly what God has told you to do. You've felt it in your spirit. You've received the confirmation. You've prayed about it, thought about it, even talked about it. But you still haven't moved. You keep saying, I will do it when I'm ready. I just need more time. I just need another sign. But the truth is, you don't need another sign. You need to obey. When God told Jonah to go to Nineveh, he didn't argue, he ran. He boarded a ship going in the opposite direction, trying to escape the assignment. And how many of us do the same? We run from what we're called to do. We make excuses. We convince ourselves that we can delay obedience without consequence. But there is always a cost to disobedience. Jonah's disobedience caused a storm. It put other people in danger. It forced him into the belly of a great fish where he had no choice but to surrender. And after all of that, God's instruction did not change. The storm didn't cancel his calling. The delay didn't rewrite his destiny. God's command remained the same. Go to Nineveh. Some of you have been running. You've been delaying. You've been trying to bargain with God, asking for more time, for more clarity, for more assurance. But obedience does not wait for convenience. God will not rewrite his instructions to fit your comfort zone. The longer you delay, the more time you waste. And while you sit in hesitation, your blessing, your breakthrough, your destiny is waiting. The Israelites delayed their promise for 40 years because they hesitated when God told them to go forward. They let fear keep them wandering when they could have been walking in victory. And many of you are doing the same. You are standing on the edge of something great, but you refuse to move. You tell yourself you need more time, but what you really need is faith. You say you're waiting on God, but God is waiting on you. The longer you delay, the longer you postpone your breakthrough. It's time to stop resisting. It's time to stop running. What God has commanded has not changed. The door is open, but you must walk through it. Move now. Your destiny is waiting. There comes a moment in life when God calls you to move, not when it's comfortable, not when it's convenient, not when you have every answer, but when he says it's time. And when that moment comes, you have a choice. Stay where it's safe and familiar, or step into the unknown and trust him completely. Faith is not about waiting for every detail to be revealed. It's about trusting the one who is leading you. Abraham left without knowing his destination. Peter walked on water without knowing how. Israel marched forward before the sea parted. Every great move of God requires obedience before understanding, action before certainty, faith before sight. Some of you have been hesitating, questioning, delaying, waiting for perfect conditions before you move. But God does not wait on your comfort. He calls you into greater. What he has for you is bigger than what you're leaving behind. The future he's prepared is greater than the past you're holding on to. But you must be willing to move. Stop looking back. Stop making excuses. Stop waiting for another sign. The sign is already here. The time is now. The door is open. The call is clear. Will you answer? Will you obey? Will you step into the destiny that is waiting for you? Move forward, walk in faith, trust God completely, and watch what he will do.